Wow. Hey, great to have you both here today.
Nice
So,
to meet you.
my name's Gary Fowler, and I am the CEO and co-founder of GSD, and this is GSD Presents. And it's a great honor today to have Cheryl Smith and Phil Perkins joining me. I appreciate your time. So, Cheryl, can you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about your background and some of the things? And it's a long distance from Penn State University.
It is. I was so happy to hear that you were from there too. Lots of Penn State around.
Yeah, Go Nittany Lions.
I have both my undergraduate and graduate degrees from Penn State. And I wanted to be a lawyer, but I fell in love with computers in grad school, and I've been in them ever since. I worked up on Capitol Hill. I was one of the first people at the U.S. House of Representatives. And then I went to Arthur Young. I was with Arthur Young for a long time, and then I had 2 children. And then in the 1980s, the term CIO became into being. And I decided that's what I wanted to be. And I wanted to be the CIO of a Fortune 50 company, which I knew was impossible since I'm female and there's only 50 of them. But I kind of wrapped my career, then made career decisions about doing exactly that. So I knew I needed application development, operations, telecommunications, and security background in order to be a well-rounded CIO. So I had already done application development. Then I went to Honeywell, and I ran their internal operations for Honeywell Federal Systems, which is a hardware, obviously, company. And then I went to Verizon, and I learned about telecommunications, granted from an IT perspective, but once you're inside the company, you learn all about their telecom, you'll learn about their products and services and about security. And then I got my first big opportunity. I was the CIO of Keyspan, which is now National Grid in New York City. And then I got the big one. I got a call one day, and they asked me if I would consider moving to San Francisco to be the CIO of McKesson, which at the time was the 31st largest company in the US. By the time I left, we were number 14. So after you kind of meet all your goals, what do you do then? And I decided to become an interim CIO. So I took on a couple interim jobs in the United States, and then I got a call, did I want to be the CIO for WestJet, which is the 2nd largest airline in Canada? And I thought, why not? It's an airline. I know lots about airlines because I fly them all the time. But I ended up being there for 4 years, and it was great. And since I've been back in the States, I've primarily been doing consulting. So I guess my kind of point for people that want to be into IT or into a CIO is you kind of have to have a goal. It has to be a dream. It has to be kind of crazy. But if you don't have a crazy dream, you're never going to make it. So.
Oh, that's great. Very, very interesting. And you were saying you were out of the country. You were in Alberta and
Calgary,
Canada. Yeah, in Calgary. I know we talked before. It gets pretty cold up there in the wintertime, doesn't it?
But I wanted to go out one day when it was minus 36 degrees just to see what it felt like. It was, it's almost impossible.
Yeah, I think the term is bone chilling, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
That's great. And Phil, it's great to have you here today. And I know Rocket Wagon, you're from Northern Illinois. If I recall, it said the Northern Illinois, you went to school in Northern Illinois, correct?
Yeah, I'm just north of Chicago, originally from Texas, though.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm sort of a serial entrepreneur. I try to lead as emerging technologies come on the market. I try to find new ways to build business models around those and bring those to market. Had a couple successes there. And now primarily the company I'm with now, where I have the privilege of having Cheryl on our board to help us sort of think through some of the bigger problems we've got. But we help companies focus on how do they join the digital age. A lot of companies built hundreds of years ago to 20 years ago are very different than the ones coming out right now. And so how do they basically take all the things they've got rather than looking at those and saying, hey, these are weights. How do we make these assets and unlock them with new technologies?
Okay, so I have a question for you. So one of the things, here we are, we're in StreamYard. Every day I use Zoom. 5 years ago when I first started, 5.5 years ago when I first started on Zoom, my friend said, "You're crazy. I have Skype. We don't need this. We don't need another thing." And now, 400 million active users per day later. I mean, the digital transformation push because COVID is really upon us. So can we talk about what's happened in the last year from your perspective, and how does that really affect startups? How does it affect companies? How does it affect investors?
Go ahead,
Do you want to take
Phil.
over, Cheryl?
Yeah.
Okay. So, it's interesting. Every industry is a little bit different, but the ones that you see, our research is the ones that are excelling right now are the ones that had all of these investments ready. And it's funny because a lot of the CIOs we work with, they were really struggling over the last 5 years to get their companies to invest in these things. But it was funny, one of the CIOs we work with, the CEO actually made a comment at their last board presentation where he's like, I have beat you up on your budget on these things over the last 4 years. I take it all back. I am sorry. I get it now. Anything you need. And it's just this happens over and over again where it's, digital is one of those things where sometimes it's hard to show the ROI, in a 3-year, 1-year period. But, when the time comes, the ones that have it, they can adapt to the new normal. And we're seeing a lot of that play out right now.
Yeah, I mean, I see the same thing. It's, when a year and a half ago with investors, oh, I'm not going to do it. I got to meet the person in person. We got to go to lunch. I got to get to know them, that kind of thing. Now with the mandates, I mean, they're really pushed forward. It's not like it was before. They know that they're going to be on the outside looking in unless they start to invest and use the technology wisely. So, is it a good thing, Cheryl, or is it a bad thing, this digital transformation?
Well, history's shown us that it really does rhyme if we look back. So the digital age started in about 1980. And as we've been through, and it'll end about 2040. I mean, that's pretty standard. And in this particular age, we found we're going through two separate, not separate, but connected types of technology, early technologies. All the technologies that are being implemented today because of COVID, those have been around and they have been taken advantage of by all of the big digital companies today, but they've been here since the 1990s. And so if companies haven't implemented a lot of these things, they're already behind. What has to happen next is all these emerging technologies, and they have to be built into the products and services that organizations have today in order to make it through this decade. So if you stop and think about it, it's really quite logical, even though it seems to be a surprise to so many people, that it's the business that has to build these technologies into the products and services. It's not IT. It's not an IT skunkworks project. And I'm coming from an IT perspective. I mean, we have to be responsible for the internal applications, for the infrastructure, for the security, for the telecommunications, for the delivery of those products. But it's the business that actually has to take a look at these emerging technologies, AI, machine learning, all of the IoT technologies, the robotics, and build it into their products and services and ways of doing business. And that's really exciting for IT people, because now IT people don't have to just go into IT. They can go into the business. They can go into do things that they really love to do, and they can bring their technology skills directly to the business.
No, that's great. And Phil, what's your opinion?
All of our research shows that, back to Cheryl's point of history rhyming, that, a lot of people were stuck at home. There's a lot of frustration, even you see a lot of economic issues, but all of the research we have shows that it's about to get really exciting. That, the next 5 years for the companies that really invest and play here, and the people that, to Cheryl's point, maybe play on the business side and unlock new opportunities, that the ride we're about to have is going to be, the same one we had at the .com. Hopefully not, the downside of
Let's
that.
hope it's not the end.
That wasn't all great, yeah, but That was a great
remember
ride there.
we did an IPO on NASDAQ, Click Software. The dot-com bubble burst in March. In June, we did an IPO on NASDAQ. You can imagine what it was like taking a canoe up some choppy waters, up the choppy waters, right? And we did it. And thank God we got it through, because if not, who knows if we would have been around. I mean, it was choppy times. This digital transformation, though, has really changed the world, right? So here we are, right, on StreamYard or Zoom, and we can connect to anybody at any place at any time, which has really changed the dynamics, right? It's, Nikola Tesla talked about the democratization of opportunities with electricity. I mean, that's really where we are today. It's changed things.
We were talking about Calgary. When I got to Calgary in 2011, and I looked around in our call center, 900 people were sitting at our headquarters building right at Calgary Airport. Now, they get snow in Calgary every single day. It's been registered throughout history, except 2 weeks during Stampede in July, which is why they hold Stampede in July. But so how do you get 900 call center agents, 3 shifts, to take care of an airline which they need the most when the weather's the worst? And so we took a look even back, it was about 2012, I guess it was, where we looked at bringing voice over IP in. And we not only used it for the call center agents, they literally have worked from home all over Canada. You can hire people anywhere. They work from home. 900 agents, better quality of life. It took them a little while to get used to it, but they love it. So these technologies have been around for a long time. The exciting part is even the new technologies that are here. We list 24 of them in the book that are generic to almost any organization.
Cheryl, you got to put the book up. You got to show the audience the book so they know what we're talking about here. The day before the digital transformation. And recently published.
Yes, just recently. Phil and I decided that I can come from the inside an organization and he can come from outside into the organizations. And what real life lessons have we learned doing digital transformation for real companies that are really successful? So we decided to put our thoughts together and give hints to people that it might seem overwhelming. It might seem totally overwhelming. And the one thing we say in the book is, if you think that by outsourcing your infrastructure to one of the public cloud vendors that you've digitally transformed, not true. All you've done is implemented one of the early digital technologies. You haven't changed your product and service and ways of doing business lines.
So the companies out there today, I have a lot of listeners from all over the world. I mean, do you do consulting in terms of, if they're interested in digital transformation, or who do they talk to? Phil?
So on our side on Rocket Wagon, that's definitely something we help with. Cheryl actually supports us quite a bit for the work we do. A lot of what we try to help them do is set that vision for what really can be achieved here with their business. And then Cheryl actually coined a term the other day, which I really liked, is help them kind of manage the politics of stalemate. That having that big vision, and it takes a big commitment, and it takes some guts sometimes to really make these things happen. So, we help companies sort of come up with what do they look like in the digital age, and help them change a lot of the cultural aspects they need to bring their organization along for the ride.
Phil
Go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just going to say, Phil and I have done this enough to know that you really can do it successfully. And it's not IT. You can't outsource it to a chief digital officer, a chief innovation officer. It's the business. It's the business leaders that have to take a look at their products, their services, some of the new technologies, and say, where do we go from here? And that's a big leap. But we hear all the time, oh, this will cannibalize sales, or we have to start small, or let's wait until somebody else does it, or we need more research, or we've tried this before. I mean, we've heard all of those excuses. But at this point in time, it's very real. And these technologies, the companies that implement them are truly more valuable, and they will survive throughout this decade and the next decade. And people that don't think that way are going to have a real problem.
So what are the top three? If you look at what do they need to do today in order, because I wrote an article, I don't know if it was in Forbes, I forget, Security Informed, but I wrote an article, Digital Transformation, Do or Die. What are the three top things that companies around the world, not only large corporations, but started, what do they need to do today in order to stay competitive and really adapt to this digital transformation? Phil?
Yeah, when we work with the companies, the first things we try to have them look at are really like, what are the mega trends? A lot of large company strategy kind of focuses 1 to 3 years out. They don't see what's coming 10 years, 20 years from now. And not that you can necessarily, make great investments on that, but if you look at Amazon, almost all their quotes are, we set a vision, we're flexible on the details, but we don't change our vision of where the future is. And we plan for 7 years. And most of the companies we work with, they plan for next quarter. And it's really hard to transform yourself if you're looking at your feet. And so we try to just sort of basically bring their eyes up a little bit. To also see, to Cheryl's point, a lot of times we hear things like, hey, we're going to the cloud, that's our digital transformation. But if we look at it, companies like Google, Facebook, Salesforce, they get, for every dollar of revenue they produce, they get 7 times market cap value. They get 80% gross margins. They spend 15 to 20% on sales and marketing and 15 to 20% on R&D. Whereas if you look at airlines and hotels, they've got significantly lower margins, and a lot of them don't even report on their R&D. They're not even investing in the technologies themselves. So it's hard to really differentiate when you're just kind of managing to the next quarter.
So we've come up with 4 strategies that apply, digital transformation strategies that apply to almost every organization. And when you think about each one of them, you kind of put your organization in one of these categories. And once you know what category you're in or what category your products or services are in, then we kind of list the technologies, the emerging technologies that you should be looking at. So we try to make it easy. So for example, you're Domino's, you have pizza. You can't change your product, right? So what can you do? There's a couple things you can do. One of our strategies is exactly what Domino's did. It totally took control of the customer. It took the customer, and now you press one button, the customer knows Domino's what you want, when you want it, where you want it, how you're going to pay for it, and you can track it and it follows you. So there's certain technologies that if you have a product that cannot be changed, what do you do? I mean, the other thing you can do, if in addition to customer engagement, is you can surround your product. So you can take these technologies and you can really have support systems and ways of doing business that completely change. Or you can have a product where you can add these new technologies to it. Like we use the example of a tractor. And John Deere and what they've done, they've added tremendous amount of technologies to the product itself, or like Tesla with cars. And then the last strategy is a platform. Do you have data that you can offer as a platform? So stop and think about each one of your products and services, which category it fits in. And then we actually help you say, okay, well, what technologies, the emerging technologies best apply to this? But you see, it's the business leaders that have to sit down and talk about this. They're the ones that have to sit down and say, what do we want and where do we want to go? Because every digital strategy, every digital technology strategy is different. And it depends upon what your strengths are right now and what you consider to be weaknesses or challenges are. In the new world, they really could be very positive for what you need to do. Sorry, Phil.
Now, I'll throw in there too, the main component of all those strategies is you have to maintain ownership of your customers. And it seems silly to say, but if you look at the previous, the mobile and web wave, all the airlines got commoditized because they gave up their customer relationships to the Orbits and the Expedias. And you're starting to see a lot of new technologies like Uber Eats, Instacart, And what, they look like friends in the beginning because they're bringing you short-term revenue, but eventually they disintermediate you, take your customer and commoditize you. And what ends up happening, and what will happen with, the Instacarts and the Uber Eats, is all the restaurants and the grocery stores are going to go out of business because now they own that customer relationship. And what prevents, you're already starting to see ghost kitchens come up, those restaurants that only exist in a kitchen and deliver on Uber Eats, but they don't have to deal with the infrastructure of the POS system and the whole store experience. The same is going to happen with grocery. Instacart looks like a friend right now, but eventually somebody's, they're going to hit a critical mass where I don't need to set up all the aisles. I don't need the POS systems. I don't need all the people. So all these disruptors look like friends in the beginning. And I think a lot of these businesses that are doing their digital transformation really need to figure out how do I keep my customer in the future?
I mean, wow. One of the things that we tried to do is to take some industries and project where they're going to be going. And Phil brings up the restaurant industry. We actually had statistics that showed that over time, over the last few decades, fewer and fewer people have been eating inside the restaurant, but it was only like 80% inside the restaurant, 20% takeout before the pandemic. And yet the stats from the restaurant industry itself said that by the mid-1930s, only 20% of the people were going to be eating in restaurants. And when we talked to restaurant people about it, they would say, I can't even imagine that. Can't even fathom that. And yet it happened. It happened almost overnight. And so now what do we see happening? Well, we see boutique restaurants, like sports bars. Sports bars will specialize in types of beers and types of drinks. And yet you'll be able to order, from your Uber Eats from any restaurant or many restaurants in the area. So it was funny because I was talking to someone from one of the big city zoos, and they were doing a 20-year plan. And they said that right now they have lots of lines of people coming into the zoo, and what should they do? And when I asked them, what were they thinking of? And they said that they were thinking of kiosks out in the parking lot where people could pay before they come in. And I'm thinking, 20 years? Why aren't you thinking of virtual assistants carrying, walking people through the zoo wherever they want to go? So it's really understanding a few of the technologies that most apply to your industry and start to really imagine what things are going to be like. And we try to help the different industries do that.
What about this? You talked about 900 employees at the airline in Calgary. What about this whole move for remote workforce management? I mean, it's really taken the entire world by storm. I mean, it's not something that I remember a few years ago was a big debate. Well, do we have remote workers? I don't know if we can manage them. But if you're in California right now with a pandemic or other parts of the U.S. or the world, you don't have a choice. You have to work from your house. So what do you think? I mean, what's the trend going to be for that? How does that play into the digital transformation? And is it here to stay?
I'll take it quick. Those 900 call center agents couldn't even fathom not coming into work every day. They couldn't even imagine it. And yet, literally, within less than a year, they were having No Pants Tuesdays parties. Whenever the airline needed an emergency, if Toronto—
No Pants Tuesdays parties?
Well, it's all virtual.
There you go. Sounds like newscasters, you know what I mean?
Well, one of the things that you need to figure out, it's the technology makes it easy today for people to work from home very, very effectively. That's even the early technologies from this age, digital age. It's not even the emerging technologies. So is it here to stay? Is it effective? Yes. The biggest question is then more the human questions. How do you keep people loyal to your company? How do you keep people involved? How do you keep people socialized? And that's when coming up with a lot of the games and things. But if we had a major storm, and everybody had to change all of their airline reservations, remember when that used to happen? We would send out a note. We would send out
a long time ago now, Cheryl. I gotta tell you, it seems like a long. I remember when I used to fly in an airplane. Those were the good old days.
Well, we used to send out a notice to all the operators and say, if you can sign on for half an hour, sign on. You'll get time and a half, and all you have to do is go down to your space, your room, your basement, your desk. We had to set everything up so that it was secure and safe and all that kind of stuff. But that's been available for a long time, Gary, and it's not going to go away. And the only thing the pandemic has done is to really make it come faster than perhaps would have everywhere.
Yeah, the accelerated digital transformation.
Well,
Phil, do you have anything to add?
the real digital stuff yet. That's the exciting thing that Phil said.
Yes, I agree. Phil, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, we've been seeing a lot of, all of a sudden different things start to matter. Like, are people working in the same time zones? Do they, the equipment they have at home, are people actually equipped? Is your internet at home? We've all experienced for people going in and out throughout the day. I think there's still a lot of thought that needs to go into how do we make people effective at home. I think it's come a long way, but I still think there's a leap that can be made for us to be just as effective as we were in person. But at the end of the day, I don't think relationships are most of business, and I do think there's something to meeting people in person, and we do need to figure out how to recapture that in the process. Because when we would have a highly virtual team in the beginning at Rocket Wagon, it's just, you miss the hallway conversations, right? All of a sudden, every meeting has intent, and it's hard to build a culture that way. So you have to find ways for those informal get-togethers to maintain the same level of culture.
I mean, what we've really found is that there's two careers that are really going to change dramatically within an organization. Yes, everybody working from home, we're going to have to figure out new ways to socialize. But one of the careers is engineering and technology, and the other career is sales. Sales and marketing is going to be completely different in the digital age. And the engineering and technology people, the skills that they have will be the same. They'll be advanced. They'll learn the emerging technologies, but they'll be embedded in the business. They will be a complete and total part of the business organization. And that is really exciting, I think, for technology people. They can always choose to stay in IT and do the infrastructure projects. I love operations. Some people, that's kind of their bag. But talk about the sales and marketing, Phil. You've run up against that. You give some great examples in the book.
Yeah, it's funny, selling in a digital world is very different too. So, one of our clients, we built a smart shelving unit. So if you go into grocery stores, we created a device that helps them track out of stock events, because they say 8 to 20% of, depending on the product SKU, goes out of stock. So they're losing revenue. What we found was we created the solution that was creative, but then we tried to throw it through the existing sales force, and it was, I take Joe out in sort of, rural Idaho, we go out for beers, I sell it to him at the cheapest price, going in and trying to tell him like, hey, I'm going to reduce your out of stock events. That's, it didn't work. So when you get into digital, it starts to become a much more complex sale, because you need to start thinking about, how do I engage the rest of the organization? And any software salesperson will tell you, there's 5 to 6 buyers on anything you try to do. Whereas if you're selling a physical product, sometimes there's just 1 or 2. And figuring out, how do I sell to the CMO and the CIO and the CTO? We've found, like, once you're doing the digital transformation, that was one example of it really does touch every part of your organization.
Yeah, you're right about it. Part of the challenges today is that, how do we develop those relationships? I know from my standpoint, in the past, I remember at the beginning of I formed an e-commerce consulting company, and we were going to work with Broadvision back in the good old days. And I remember going out there and saying, how do we get noticed? So I got a couple of cases of mugs, and I stuck them in their lunchroom that had our name on it. And then there was only 3 of us, but we each had shirts, and we each had 10 slacks, and we wore the same kind of shirts every day with our logo on them. And it just, people said, I've heard that name before. And if I had to do it digitally, there are obviously ways to do it. With the digital transformation, gives us a lot of opportunities by using the online mediums, just like we're doing today, to be able to get the word out and establish. So a lot more of that has to take place too, right? You got to get the word out. You got to be on panels and that kind of thing to get that trust, I guess, factor. And that's another challenge. You know, if you're a salesperson, you said rightly so, how do you develop a relationship with the CMO if you don't even know the CMO? And how do you get that? You know, you're not going to go walking by in a lobby. Oh, hi, Janice, nice to meet you. You know, it just isn't going to happen. So you got to figure out creatively with LinkedIn and other strategies to do it. You know, this is a world, right?
We have a whole chapter on branding, because brand is no longer watching a TV commercial on 3 channels. It has changed completely. It has to do with social media. It has to do with understanding how to deal with social media, understanding when to talk, when not to talk. One of the examples I give in the book is our competitor airline up in Canada. I won't mention who it is, although there's only one. They had a real issue. It was a disaster situation, or close to a disaster situation. And WestJet had always been so good at social media that a lot of the people turned to WestJet to try to figure out, because it was just a cluster. They couldn't figure out what to do or even begin to how to interface with the airline. And WestJet, to their credit, the social media people called their folks over at the competitor and said, what do you want us to say? How do you want us to help you? And it made all the difference in the world. So sales and marketing is going to be completely different, completely. And we try to talk about the ramifications and the impacts of that in the book and how to deal with it, because there's ways today to do that. But, you know, marketing is no longer, like I said, going up to 1 of 3 TV channels and putting it out on the Super Bowl.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's everywhere, and it's a touch point, and it's international. You know, it's I don't know about you're like myself, but I mean, I'm on the phone with Africa, Asia every day. I'm in Australia. You know, it's not like before. It's not like a year ago. It's changed in terms of the reach and how much information and how much people are really questing and thirsting for information. So yeah, it's a new, you know, I look at it as the beginning of the 20th century, and AI and this digital transformation is really the new electricity. And look at how our lives have changed. And now you add things like quantum computers into the mix, quantum networks, unsupervised AI, and this it's going to be amazing what's going to happen over the next 30 years. So yeah, I just did a presentation in front of the top pharmaceutical companies in Europe, and it was about AI and drug discovery. And not a lot of people know that many of the COVID vaccines developed without a lot of bench time based on models. And imagine being able to live to 120. We did a paper a few years ago with some MBA students living to 120. And this is now reality. So yeah, this digital transformation puts a lot of things forward. The other thing is, I mean, think about it from online training. I mean, how do we develop these immersive experiences to make it so that it's more three-dimensional? And, I feel like I'm in a group, right? I feel like I'm at a table and having some interaction with folks rather than petting my dog.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I actually spend a lot of time with my kids at night doing their homework, because what I found is the videos are helpful, but they do crave just having someone else there to interact with as they learn. Like they've gotten much more disciplined. I give them a ton of credit with that. But yeah, the human aspect of it, I just, for an hour, I'll just sit next to my son and we're just doing math, because he just needs to ask questions of someone,
Yeah,
that's fantastic. It's changed a lot, and there's more humanity. In fact, I was just reading this thing recently that said the bike sales were up almost 70% during this pandemic because people were out with their families riding bikes again and doing, like board games, things that I thought were disappeared for good, right? Monopoly and Life and all this, board games have come back. So it's really changed us in a lot of ways. At the same time, you're right in terms of this. There was a book by Viktor Frankl, was A Man's Search for Meaning. And, having that humanity, those touch points is really important. So, well, hopefully the pandemic will be over sooner than later. hopefully there'll be incredible immersive technologies, which we see a lot of them coming out in AR and VR to make it a better relationship. So we're coming up to the top of the hour. What are your closing thoughts, Phil, in terms of, what do you see over the next year? What do you see over the next 5 years? And how do people get a hold of you if they're interested in talking to you about the digital transformation?
Yeah, both Cheryl and I are on LinkedIn. We actually have a page for the book. So if you just search The Day Before Digital Transformation or either of our names on LinkedIn, you'll find us. I think the thing we'll probably close with is one of the quotes from the book is, we tend to overestimate what's going to happen in 2 to 3 years and underestimate what's going to happen in 10. And everything on the horizon shows that by 2030, we're going to start seeing things that blow our minds. And it used to be, if I took a caveman forward, 2,000 years, that's when it would start to blow his mind in terms of how much technology has improved. Over the next 10 years to 20 years, I think we're going to start seeing things where like our grandparents are going to look at it and say, that completely blows my mind, and I don't know how to sort of function in this society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree with you. It's just look at quantum computing coming into the mix right now, right? When you get systems estimated, well, you can believe what the Chinese are saying, 1 billion times faster, right, than a supercomputer. So even if it is, 10,000 times faster, imagine how much our lives are going to change and how much data we can really process and analyze, and what happens to cybersecurity, right? So there's a lot of other questions that start to come into play. Great. Cheryl, your closing thoughts?
Basically, what we've talked about, that the next 10 to 20 years is going to be the ride of our lives. Yes, we'll be able to deal with it. Yes, we'll be able to handle it. Yes, people are already out there understanding how to take the elephant one bite at a time. It's definitely doable. But there's so much opportunity for so many people. Across the board, at all levels, all organizations, all types of companies and nonprofits and government to take advantage of this technology. So it's going to be fun.
It's going to be a ride, that's for sure. So I want to thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. I'm humbled having you as my guest. And my name's Gary Fowler, and this is GSD Presents. We'll be on again next week, so stay tuned. Appreciate your time. Stay safe. And thanks again, Cheryl and Phil. I really appreciate you coming on board today. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.